Hello everyone. My name is Ignat. I am a master's student of two institutes of the Academy of Physical Culture Malakovka and the Russian University of Sports. Igor Shpinkov, a martial arts master and psychologist, is my guest today. Please introduce Igor, but tell us what you do in the framework of physical culture.
I have been doing physical culture since childhood. I have always loved to move actively, and for me the key point in my life was when I got into the martial art. It was when I turned 14 years old, and after that I passed through a large number of different systems and hand-to-hand combat, wrestling, working with cold weapons, and at the moment I specialize in working with cold weapons, with bladed weapons, and in general it is very much connected with movement in principle. Therefore, the topic is close to me. I've had coaching experience there for 20 years already. I'm somewhere with 2000. Since the 2004 year I have been continuously teaching and studying. Therefore, physical education is what I do.
Igor, and use in your training exactly what kind of weapons, so to speak. What kind of blade do you have? As I understand it, yes, you said. That's it.
Yes, I work with a short blade. This is a knife, a dagger, a dirk, a navajo, a stiletto. This is a dangerous razor. It can be a short-bladed sword there, or I also work with a long blade. This is a little bit not my profile, but still in the process of training I have to work with long-bladed weapons. Here, there is also a tool such as a stick. This no longer applies to bladed weapons, but it is, in my opinion, one of the best methodological tools for putting movement to a person.
That's how the questions will be related today to the study of movement with a stick. This is my first question to you, Igor. What exactly is the advantage of closed curves of movements, that is, eights? Here is the movement of eights with a stick. I understand it is possible with a blade. That's exactly what I wanted to clarify about the prehistory of the movement of eights.
Yes, well, let's start with the fact that I would divide the movement into two such subtypes, because they are infinite in their variety. But if we consider it from the point of view of some systems, then the movement can be linear, reciprocating back and forth, yes. And, for example, from the point of view of fencing there, you can work in a forward-backward line, just a distance. Or maybe the movement is spherical when it spreads in all directions. And this movement is more vital, more natural, because if we look at nature in general, then everything in nature is cyclical.
I agree.
Day-night, there's summer, winter, tide-ebb, and it's all usually not in line, but it immediately spreads to 360 degrees. And from the point of view of human movement, in the same way, you can look at just linear movement and you can look at movement in volume. Moreover, if we take some basic movements, well, for example, a person is breathing. When a person breathes, he expands in all directions and also begins to return back to the starting position. And this is a fundamentally different structure of movement, a fundamentally different mindset, well, a different volume. But, on the other hand, when a person begins to move and think in a sphere, as if so spherical, yes, then these are completely different resources, completely different processes. I can give you an example right away. A person who thinks in linear logic, and if it is transferred there to martial arts, to some conflict situation, yes, then one-on-one such linear duel. And if you look at the spherical, then there may be several opponents and they can work from different sides. And if a person in his base does not think 360 degrees, but he works all the time in a linear perspective, that is, he works one-on-one, as, for example, it happens in sports. In sports, this is usually a one-on-one duel. Whether it's boxing, fencing, it may be some kind of wrestling or something else. That is, there is such a mindset. Well, accordingly, the duel itself is being built up like this. And if you watch martial arts, then we look at a larger volume. Why? Because, firstly, there may be several opponents, they may be armed with different objects, someone may be unarmed at all, and someone may be armed with spears, swords, anything, yes, and this, respectively, immediately teaches you to think differently, and accordingly, according to another move. And returning to the movement itself, if we consider the figure of 8, the figure of 8 is closer to the spherical movement. Why? Because there are no points, there are no stops, but there is a constant change in direction and it gives rise to volume. And from one figure of 8, when we work in the same plane, we live in three-dimensional space.
Yes, yes, yes.
If you make an 8 in the frontal plane, in the horizontal plane and in the sagittal plane, yes? Then just this 8, it will take the form of a sphere. That is, if we take an 8, for example, here I take, well, let's say so that the audience can see, I take a sagittal plane, and you can draw an 8 like this, like an infinity sign, right? You can draw it as an 8.
Yes.
Vertically, and you can draw a bunch of intermediate options, well, we will get like this.
Yes, I understood what it was about, like a ball of 8s.
Yes, and this will give a sphere in this plane. If we add this plane, we'll get like, well, like the globe, right? Just like a ball, a sphere. And when a person learns to think, to move in this way, then he has a much larger number of techniques and much more variations. And he thinks in other categories, which is an advantage. But it is an advantage when a person has enough operational attention so that he can manage this volume, control it. And if this volume is not enough for the mind, yes, the operating system does not cope, of course, then it is impossible for him to have a spherical form of movement. He will learn faster in linear and will be more effective. But if we consider the ceiling, the upper limit, then this one will be spherical, it will always absorb a simpler linear system.
That is, in principle, in your training processes, when you train yourself, teach students, the first thing you teach them is the movement of such a basic yes, but the basic movement you are the 8, do I understand this correctly? And or how?
I would call it differently, the basic movement is a circle.
Circle.
Circle. Because what is an 8?
Well, it's a circle, yes.
This is if we just take and twist the circle, it turns out, yes, it turns out like a spiral-like movement. That is, the 8 is a varieties of circles. The basic movement, it is formed from three circles. There are 2 directions in each. We take a circle, yes, clockwise, counterclockwise. We take the horizontal plane, the frontal plane, the sagittal plane. When a person masters circular motion, then he complicates it through the 8. The same directions sing counterclockwise and the same 3 planes. When a person masters this movement, this type of control movement in this format, then it extends to everything else, because what do we have? We have this kind of form, right? And if we take from the point of view of the structure of the human body, we have 3 centers. The center of mass is located here, in the abdominal area, yes, the physical center of mass. And the redistribution of the body in general, movement, it starts from here. But at the same time, we also have a certain significance in the chest area. Why? Because whatever we do, we usually do with our hands. Yes, to do with our hands, we need to stand normally on the support, on our feet, but connecting the support with the hands, this connection occurs through this center. Therefore, it is necessary that the chest, it can also redistribute efforts in these planes and work actively, adequately, easily, comfortably. And the third center is the area of the head, because, firstly, the skull itself together with the brain, but this is quite a decent weight from the point of view of balance. Yes, if we move fast on inertia, then we need it. This is somehow such a control center, you can say, both as a balancer and as a decision-making center. Therefore, we can conditionally divide the body into 3 centers, the lower, middle, upper center, and all these 3 centers should be on the same axis, because we are still upright, we have an axis, a spine, and we need to learn how to connect these 3 centers. And when there is this connection, each of the centers is able to move freely in this volume so that the other 2 centers complement this movement. Then it turns out that the distribution of movement is more efficient, and this is universal, because a person may be, I don't know, maybe this person is running or going somewhere in the mountains. Either walking or running. If we take athletes, there may be endurance marathoners, or there may be sprinters who need to shoot quickly, and it may be some kind of rugby player who still needs resistance, right? With an obstacle.
Yes, yes, yes.
It can be a person who paddles kayaks, it can be a skier who descends, and this is both an athlete and an amateur. That is, no matter how a person moves, even if he has no support, a parachutist, he still controls through the center, through the body. And here it is important to learn that the centers move freely, this is the time. 2. It is necessary to achieve a homogeneous state throughout the body, because if there is a clamp somewhere, then the energy, well, I mean a physical impulse, that is, when you make an impulse, if the body is inhomogeneous, it will get stuck or distributed incorrectly. There will be no attachment of the whole body, it will not be possible to balance. And how can uniformity be achieved? Due to such complete rigidity, hardness, that is, a person is homogeneous, but solid, and he can be homogeneous and completely soft. And that's the better control a person has, the range from a very soft state to the most elastic, firm. The more range he has, the better he has control of his body and the better his technique will be, no matter what he does. That is, I came to such universal things and realized that the main thing to teach a person is to teach him how to use his body and move holistically. That's it, holistically, not separate arms and legs.
Yes, yes, yes.
Exactly, holistically. And this leads to a different quality of technique, thinking, movement, even the state of health. It is directly related to this. And this is where we started talking about the stick. Yes, the stick, in my opinion, is one of the universal tools that allows you to put it clearly and quickly.
Look, it turns out if we take, for example, a holistic movement. Yes, it's like, well, let's call it an 8 there conditionally. This is a holistic movement. It's like she doesn't have a particularly clear starting point where she can start at any moment, and she doesn't have a finish point. That is, if we launch such a pendulum, it will be infinite, and if we take a rectilinear motion, then it always has a start and finish, right? And accordingly, if we take within the framework, for example, just movements in any kind of sport there or in the framework of some kind of activity there, yes, then if a person knows how to start from any point and finish at any point, then this is like a more professional activity, as it turns out. And if he can only start from the starting point and only finish, yes, that is, it turns out, as you said, he cannot expand, as it were, the possibility of his movements or his activities there. That is, he needs a start, right? And a finish is needed. That is how I understand it. And you, as it were, with the help of your movements, training, yes, that is, you teach a person in any space, place, time, yes, to feel this integrity of your movements. Do I understand that correctly? Is this the basic idea like this?
Yes.
Or how?
Yes, I'll explain a little now, because besides martial arts, I did a lot of things in terms of movement and taught. In particular, I taught dancing at one time, and that too. In general, martial arts and dancing are like two sides of the same coin, there is no fundamental difference there. In martial arts, you need to cause damage as much as possible, and in dancing, on the contrary, partners should be there as much as possible. If we're talking about couples, it's nice to give pleasure through contact, through movement. But at its core, it's the same thing, here. And what is the moment here? In whatever areas of movement we go, but again returning to the paradigm I mentioned at the beginning, linear or spherical. When a person moves linearly, he also thinks. That is, if he works in the same plane, then it turns out that the nervous system gets used to it and he learns to think in a linear, one-sided way, and he does not try to look around immediately, to see some additional options, because the psyche is so rebuilt. If he has some muscles developed, and some are clamped, then a person begins to think in this way and, accordingly, he gets the same behavior. From the point of view of martial arts, I notice that there are such types of people who have a tough aggressive technique, they are straight linear, that's just like a tank or like a rhinoceros, it just goes through walls. And when the process of communication begins, like everyday issues, professional issues, well, any kind of question, it is clear that the same patterns of behavior are included in his dialogue. And here he is, somehow, a rhinoceros begins to work. But if this is a big plus in one case, then in another case it is a big minus. When flexibility is needed, when it is necessary to agree, it does not work for such people. And when a person begins to move voluminously and develop this system, then he can return to the line, because the line is a simpler system. It can linearly do. Just if the figure of 8, it can be made as rounded as possible, and you can make it as sharp as possible. And here is practically a line. And it can be expanded. And such a person has more options and more flexibility. And he, as a rule, initially begins to think, and communicate, and move immediately more easily, more freely. And this is directly related, directly related to how a person moves, how he develops it. Therefore, in this regard, it makes sense, it makes sense to develop this volume.
Yes, I get it. Look Igor, there's another question. It turns out that you studied martial arts, martial arts without weapons, right? That is, this is one level of movement, yes, but then you add another level to this level of movement by taking an object in your hand. That is, you transfer your energy, as it were, you lengthen your arm. It could be a cocoon like an animal there, or it could be a stick of longer means. That is, here it also turns out the next level of how to build movement in your head. Yes. Can you tell me a little bit about this? How did you figure that out for yourself?
Yes, there is such a moment here that when a person works with a weapon, it doesn't matter if he has a knife or a sword, or a pole, or if it's a bow and arrow, yes, or if it's a firearm, then the weapon should become an extension of the body, an extension of the arm. And accordingly, if we are talking about mastery, then a person should feel this object as a part of himself. Then it becomes effective, then he understands how to work with it, and then his opponent or opponents, they instantly start reading it too. Accordingly, it is possible to influence a person at a distance. Why? Because the nervous system reads danger. If there is danger, or if there is no danger, it all works, and therefore, if a person knows how to use it, then it is possible to influence it from a distance in this way. And in order to control an object, there are no nerve endings in the object, but it is necessary to develop sensitivity, in particular fine motor skills, so that the hands are so sensitive and can transmit an impulse from the whole body to the object and also control it. And here, the larger the object, the finer the motor skills, the higher the control system should be. And in this regard, when it comes to working with a stick, with a pole or fencing, yes, with a rapier, with some such objects, then there is control at high speeds, very subtle, precise, and due to the fact that there is an opposition, like a duel, all this immediately escalates the fact that it is always a matter of life and death. If a person misses a blow with a cold weapon, he understands that everything is over, he is dead. And accordingly, you need to move so as to be ready to hit the enemy and not to die at the same time. And when the nervous system works in this mode, it develops the culture of movement in general very well. That is, here you need to learn so that the object becomes a continuation of the body, and for this the amount of attention needs to be maximized. Conditionally, attention can be considered as a metaphor and as a muscle. That is, for example, if my muscles are weak, I take a horizontal bar, pulled up once, that's it, I can't pull up twice. If I train, in a month I pulled up twice, in a year I pulled up 10 times, through there, if I constantly train there, I do not know, in the Guinness Book of Records there are almost 1,000 times pulled up. That is, it is amenable to training. It's a muscle. Well, that's if we're talking about the physical body now. If we consider attention as a metaphor, we look at attention, operational attention, then conditionally attention can also be trained. And you can use such an analogy as light. Here's someone, attention, this is a small flashlight. He dedicated and he's like this spot. Someone has a more powerful flashlight, and someone has a spotlight from the stadium. The man turned on and he just dazzles with this light. And if I give an example from martial arts, take two warriors. One is a master, and the other is untrained. Here they stand in the pitch darkness opposite each other. An unprepared warrior turned on his flashlight, illuminated some part of this warrior, where he wants to hit there or this, and it's such a spotlight. He's just blinding him. Therefore, when there is an impact, in addition to technology, there is always an impact at the level of the psyche. And when there is such a dense pressure mentality, there is still this danger, a real threat to life. It's all read by the opponent's nervous system. And if his signal is weaker, if his system is less developed, there is no chance.
Look, when did you first learn how to basically work with yourself, right? Well, that is, with your own body, and when you were already switching to roughly speaking subject activity, that is, with the subject, yes, that is, was it difficult for you to switch, and was it something so new, unusual for you? I mean, how quickly did you catch it? That is, if we take a developing organism, yes, that is, we first taught it to use itself, and then switch to the subject. That's exactly the transition itself. And what did he give you in addition? Could you count it by yourself?
The subject allowed me to better understand self-management. Due to this, there was an increase. And when I began to manage myself better, I began to manage the subject better. Here I have just given an example of how such a situation is a matter of life and death.
Yes, yes, yes.
It's just like that, too, as a metaphor, as a training model. Because when a person has developed such attention that he is able to incinerate his opponent like that, he takes this amount of attention and directs it to peaceful life. Here is an atom. Maybe an atomic bomb that destroys cities, or maybe a nuclear power plant that can provide electricity to several cities. In this regard, attention is just atomic energy, conditionally, yes, I'm speaking metaphorically now. And someone has so much of it that a person can use it in the negotiation process, in the thought process. If he is a scientist, he develops some mental processes accordingly, or he is a professional in some specific field, but he has such a reserve of operational attention that allows him to be a little further than, most people who simply do not have it developed. Firstly, I am convinced that every person can develop this, and secondly, it turns out that the subject itself gives, in addition to developing a culture of movement, that a person really begins to move completely differently. In addition to the culture of movement, a culture of thinking is also developing, and it's all directly related. Therefore, there is an immediate increase in the quality of human life in general. And here the object is the tool that allows the body to be transferred to a completely different level of development through the object. Due to the fact that attention is required more, it is more difficult to manage, and that's all. When it comes back, it gives this effect.
Look, Igor, you're not doing sports. Well, how would you feel about sports? Well, no matter how you feel about him, because you don't do sports, I take it, right? Well, or how to say it correctly.
Here is my personal opinion. If we take professional sports, this,
of course, professionally,
according to the experience of observation, it cripples professional sports. Now there is such a level of requirements for professional athletes that without doping, without overloads for the body, people are simply not competitive.
Yes.
Therefore, an athlete, he understands that for what? Why does he do this? And of course, I think it's not a fact. How is it not necessary to convince anyone that he cripples professional sports?
That is, I have.
People get disabled.
I meant that, for example, if we take in the framework of physical education, but here you are doing for yourself, teaching others. You're not teaching them so that they can then go somewhere there to perform and achieve some heights for themselves, for their own world.
And here it turns out not sports, but physical culture. Sports and physical culture are different in terms of goals, respectively, and load, respectively, and approaches. If there is a need for nosebleeds in the framework of competitions, it does not matter that there will be an injury, but you need to perform and win, and this is why health is so affected. Then if we are talking about health, longevity and development, then the approach is fundamentally different here. It is necessary to pick up the load as much as possible, adapt it so that it improves life, develops it, and of course, yes, I am more in favor of this approach.
And look Igor, if we take your training processes, well, for example, they're with the subject. With the subject, right? That is, we can also include several types of activities here within the framework of all these trainings. That is, this is the first type of activity, it's there, relatively speaking, martial arts just as in its purest form. Well, that is, there is some kind of elementary struggle, interaction with the enemy, yes. Then there. This is also the UFP automatically, training there for balance, coordination, agility, speed, strength qualities, right? That is, how would you fill it, that is, relatively speaking, using only one type of training process, yes, that is, how much we will use at once, if within the framework of a child's development there, yes, there, or a person, how much we will use all at once. That is, nothing. You don't specialize narrowly. That is, we came today and here we are, relatively speaking, performing 1,000 times there. That is, you capture all kinds of activities as much as possible.
Yes, here it is purely by experience, I have come to this, because I have watched a lot of masters, outstanding people who, like how a person moves, how he thinks, how he acts, he surpasses even the most developed person by an order of magnitude. That is, they are unique people in general. But these are people who gave their lives to this.
But this.
And I noticed that all the masters, they even move in a similar way. They are all integral. The key thing for them is integrity. They can work in completely different techniques, but they have this, it unites them. Then I began to think, so, since integrity is important, then it means you need to learn and teach it. And having asked myself such questions, I gradually came to know how to do it. And now, no matter what request a person comes with, I understand that he just needs to be brought to integrity. And with what instrument, through what instrument, in what way, this is secondary. And I usually adapt to a person, that is, I see that a person, here he initially has such a background. So through this background, then I just give him exercises. I come up with new exercises every time. Why? Because I have a system. I have a system of knowledge to come to. Metaphorically, I can say this, if there is a mountain, yes, high, here. And I've been to the top many times. I went down, I take another tourist there, and we do the ascent of the mountain. But I take a new route every time. Why? The glacier shifted, the paths were all filled up. And due to the fact that I was there, I understand how to get there and I can help a person make this ascent. Because if he had walked by himself, he might not have made it. There are many nuances, it is dangerous. But there are pitfalls, as they say. And due to the fact that I have been there many times, constantly, then he is with me, he has much more chances and probability that he will go up there. But he gets his own experience anyway. I don't do his work for him, I only help him to make this ascent. Conventionally, the vertex is the integrity. And how to come to this? With each person or with each group we go our own way. It depends on the group, on the age, because there is one job with children, another job with adults. If a person came, he was originally a boxer there, this will be one type of training. And if a person came, he was originally a dancer there will be a different type of training. And you can use sticks, you can use knives, you can use basketball there, through dancing, through surfing, no matter what. I once conducted a training session for. There is such a wake movement, not a wake, but sap boarding is becoming popular and this is such an inflatable board and paddle. And so we just took the oars and did exercises, and on the water with these oars. And people got additional experience and it promoted them in their sport. Because they are professionals there, and I gave them some other vision, because anyway, we will still return to these three centers. And a person, as far as he controls his body, so he will be able to continue to control any object or just a body, or if it is an interaction with another person, he still controls through the control of his body.
And look, here's a question. If we take categories of people, yes, well, who have you worked with, that is, how do you think from what age it is possible to train children with the use of perhaps, well, children can be teenagers with the use of objects. That is, we shift the center of gravity to them, well, from the main ones, even our stick is heavier, he has to pay extra attention. Well, as if its center of gravity is slightly shifting, well, extra weight. That is, from what age would you give such a good advice? Maybe future parents or children there should begin to master these movements, already bringing them to the periphery. I mean, you know what's next, right?
Yes, I understand. Such a question is ambiguous. Why? Because it depends on the possibilities. I started training my son from birth right away. That is, he was born and I immediately began to put objects in his hands so that his skill would already be formed.
Yes, yes, yes.
And he mastered my grip before he even learned to crawl. Here.
Well, and if we take it within the framework, well, relatively speaking, we take it within the framework of such general physical training there in institutions, in schools there of this format. That is, as if we take an integral system of some kind, not an individual one.
Yes, I understand, but here again from the very, very early age, when the child is already able to perceive information, you just need to submit it in the form of a game. It is necessary to serve in the form of a game, and it is necessary to load the child as much as possible on all planes, modalities. It is necessary to immediately form this veracity in it so that it works equally well in all planes, horizontal, frontal, sagittal, and just so that it can interact with the object and with each other. That is, the sooner the better here, because they have the ability to adapt, to develop. Here the child was born, his abilities decrease sharply immediately within a few hours, days there. Then there is a cutoff, this is a year, up to a year. Then, again, all this begins to shrink to 3 years, and there is such a point in the region of 5 years. Well, that's the age Mowgli's children have won. There is such a category that if, for example, after 5 years a child is rescued, he lived there with animals before, yes, well,
I get it.
An accident, then even a person can no longer be trained. He won't learn speech. And this is an example, and it directly affects the movement. Therefore, the richer the upbringing in terms of motor activity, the earlier, the better. Here I would put it that way, and there who has what opportunities. That is, if you organize specialized kindergartens, where children are engaged directly from the nursery and in the form of a game without loads. It should be a pleasure, a joy. But there are swords to roll, some sticks to draw, that's something else.
Throws there.
Throwing stones, yes, yes. Here you just need the maximum variety. And when a child already has such an age when he more or less understands. Here I had experience working with children, there the age is somewhere there 6 to 12 years.
Elementary school, right?
It is with sticks. And moreover, there was such a motley group. And I see how quickly children grasp it, they like it, and here they don't even need to understand it directly, they need to absorb it at the level of movement. And this gives them a great advantage in further development, because the richer a person is in movement, the richer he will be both intellectually and mentally. Because it's connected directly.
But we do not prepare it in any kind of specialization, we just prepare it in life by doing so.
Play, interest, joy. Here are 2 such ingredients of success, development, this is movement and joy. This is the key. If there is joy and a person moves, the rest is secondary.
Look, here's another question. How does your chosen part of this whole physical culture, yes, where you specialize, affect a person's level of intelligence? That is, in the future, what kind of advantages does he receive? No, I've already told you a lot about it, but if we take the level of intelligence there, yes, that's exactly the development of such intelligence, perhaps it's new, well, let's even talk primitively, for example, everyone knows about it there, if you study the new movement, there are new communication neurons, right? That's about your intelligence and your, so to speak, part of the training process, that's your entire specialization.
Yes, I found such a pattern here, and I first discovered it with the help of my experience, well, just on groups, on. A large number of people passed through it, and then I found confirmation of this information already in the scientific field, there in particular in psychology and other aspects. And what is the key here? This is the development of symmetry. Right hand, left hand. If you take the brains of musicians, those who play the violin and those who play the piano, they have fundamentally different development. Why? Because symmetrically and asymmetrically it greatly affects. And in particular when working with a stick and a knife, too. Yes, I definitely teach the missing side right away, because our society is mostly left-handed or right-handed. Well, more right-handed, but this is just such a strong role. And when you teach a person to move symmetrically, exactly what you can do with your right hand, you should be able to do with your left hand. Again, not with the hand, with the whole body, but it is necessary to make this synchronization. And when this happens, a person just has an intellectual explosion. He has opportunities in all his areas previously studied, because everyone is even a professional in something.
Yes.
People are from completely different spheres, from different professions, from different specialties, different types of addition, but absolutely everyone has such a powerful leap in terms of intelligence development. Some creative abilities, new creativity, new ideas, new people, here they immediately have a leap.
That is, he is looking for new ways to solve the problem.
Do they come by themselves?
Yes, yes, yes.
It's just here with some people with whom I communicate quite deeply, just, well, so to speak, students who have been training with me for many years. Apart from this, there were no fundamental changes in life. But precisely due to the fact that there was such an emphasis on the left-right movement, synchronization, changes immediately occur in all spheres of life. This is a relationship, this is a professional activity, this is a worldview, and this is a sense of self. And this is what I would highlight. This gives a powerful boost.
And look, it turns out that you are a martial artist and that's psychology. Yes, here we have added psychology, as I understand it, you're kind of not new, but already established, too, direction, where you are now, as it were, specializing.
Yes, because I started teaching around when I was about 21 years old. Now I'm almost 40. And when you're a coach, you work with the team. Both with the team and individually. Every coach is a psychologist, well, whether you want it or not, you just won't be able to manage the team. Therefore, the psychological direction, it was not always interesting. Plus, I've been through a lot of training on this topic. And just a few years ago, I plunged straight into this topic, so to speak, already professionally, received additional education, and now, as part of my project, I also began to lead this as a separate direction. Why? Because I noticed that not all people, they think that their movement will develop like this. Although I am convinced that development should only be comprehensive. If a person wants to develop, then he must necessarily work with his body and must work with his psyche. It's a complementary thing. If a person works only with the body or only with the psyche, it is less effective than working in volume. And since I am interested in this, I have added this direction additionally. Namely, my psychological experience, it is in the sense that, well, I am a coach. I've been a coach there for 20 years, right? Of course it's already at the level, just at the skill level. And now that I notice that when I see, for example, it's enough for me to understand how a person moves, I already see his psychological failures and problems. And there are two ways to go here. You can go through the psychological side, that is, certain mental, so to speak, problems can be solved, a person's movement changes, the body changes, this psychosomatics goes away, the problem goes away. Or you can go through the movement, because a person begins to move more gently, more freely, more holistically, he has these psychological clamps that also releases him and he also becomes more holistic. But now I have come to the point that I combine both methods depending on the client.
That is, when you conduct training groups there or train individually, that is, you are already, as it were, directly here to your student, you also pass on this knowledge to them. That is, no matter how he directly receives a course in psychology there, yes, but he still forms it, and in the future he understands that it's all connected. That is, as if there is such a kind of self-regulation, such a thing is transmitted to him.
Let's try to explain it as simply as possible. If we take from the point of view of the structure of the psyche, conditionally we can divide the psyche into two parts. There is a conscious part, there is an unconscious part. Accordingly, we can also divide the unconscious part into two. There is an unconscious, something that is directly related to our instincts, to our life, as if by nature, yes, as it should be. And there are accumulated errors, distortions, various complexes, roughly speaking, by analogy with a computer, virus software that prevents nature from functioning normally. Yes? And the task, is to bring to consciousness, to the conscious part, what is happening in the unconscious. So that a person, when he turns on this mode, well, where he is like an error, yes, where he is failing, so that he at least tracks it and can turn it off in a timely manner. And so that his consciousness is focused precisely on his natural part. So that a person moves, lives, develops by nature. Because every person is unique. If he works and lives in agreement with his nature, this is one efficiency. If a person goes against his nature, well, of course, the effectiveness is different. And here I'm just kind of reconfiguring his system. He helps a person to understand this, because this requires a person from the outside and to make friends with his consciousness and his nature. But if on the fingers, then it looks something like this. If in practice, of course, everything is much more complicated.
Got it. Igor, in principle, I have no more such questions. Tell me, do you have a future project that you want to implement, or do you have a new direction? That is, you study a lot of things. I've heard that you now use a straight razor in your training processes. Well, a little thing to say, can you give a presentation of this project?
Well, if you take what I do, I have a project, it's called Peaceful Warrior.
Yes.
And this is a project about complex human development, where I use just the knowledge of martial arts, physical education, but everything related to human movement and knowledge about psychology in order to maximize the natural potential of a person, maximize the development of his mental abilities, his psyche, his body, well, and maximize the person here for what it is designed for, yes. So there are several directions at once. Separately, there is a martial arts direction. This is work. This is hand-to-hand combat, work with edged weapons, work with a stick, that is, there are a lot of such under the direction of them. They are all about integrity. That is, there can already be a lot of specialization. I'm just constantly learning something new myself and adding it to the project all the time. And the second half of the project is precisely the development of such a psychological, mental direction from the point of view of the development of the human psyche. Here comes both the intellect and the psyche as a system, yes, because it can be a psyche, well, as some such element, too. After all, when people start communicating with each other, you enter the same space with someone and you feel comfortable.
Yes.
And with someone you feel, some unpleasant person, it's better to move away. This is due to what happened in the interaction of the psyche. And here I am, using the experience of martial arts to teach a person in such moments. That is, my task of the Peaceful Warrior project is to upgrade a person as much as possible so that his potential is revealed to the maximum. Yes, as much as possible. And the project is alive, it is developing, the direction is constantly being added, as if new people are attracted. And that's what I do, my main thing.
That's it, got it. Thank you, Igor. Igor Shpinkov was our guest today. Well, guys, see you again.
Ask questions in the comments, subscribe to the channel, put likes.
Everyone, thank you all.